Hello and welcome to today's episode of A Slice of Medieval. It's Derek and myself today, and we are doing our second special edition episode of book recommendations. Now, every time we have a guest on A Slice of Medieval, I would say we ask them, but I think it's more like we challenge them to recommend a fiction and a non-fiction book. Now, we have discovered that not all authors find this easy, and a lot of us read so much that we can't just pick one or two books. What we found surprising in both fiction and non-fiction guests, they have a very eclectic reading habit. And like I say, can't just recommend one of each. What I didn't realise was how our guests were so happy to talk about their reading habits. So first up, we have Edward II's biographer, Kathryn Warner, Emma of Normandy's biggest fan, Patricia Bracewell, and the author of the excellent dual biography of Richard II and Henry IV, Helen Castor. So the question is, do you have a fiction and a non-fiction book recommendation?
So unfortunately, I kind of have to admit that I almost never read historical fiction in my spare time because it just feels like work. So I prefer to read kind of books that are on a totally different theme than reading historical fiction. But a few months ago, I discovered this author called Scott Mariani, who's now written. Oh, sorry, yeah, I see your reaction there. And he's written this series of novels, yeah. So, which are kind of, I suppose, they're adventures. I suppose you might call them a kind of like military style adventures, because his main character is called Ben Hope, and he's a former SAS soldier. So he kind of goes around all around the world, having adventures. With lots of shooting and deaths and various things. But what I actually do love about the books is that many of them, it may even be most of them, do have kind of historical, this historical dimension. So like one of them in the series is called A Tudor Deception. And he goes back, talk about Richard III and Henry VII and so on. And the one I'm reading at the moment is the latest one. It's called A Templar Secret. So it's about the destruction of the Knights Templar in the early 1300s. So the first scene of the novel, it opens in April 1308. I'm like, oh, it's exactly my time period. So to me, that they're great. That they're great escapism, because in a way they kind of had this almost James Bond dimension in that Ben Hope is always, traveling to Indonesia and China and like all over the world, and having all these adventures. So, or almost like Indiana Jones type adventures, really. So, and that he's always going to defeat the bad guys, and you just don't know how, but. I just love that historical dimension to them as well. Like there's another one I recently read where, they're looking for like a lost city founded by Alexander the Great. So, it's that kind of thing. So there's quite a lot of archaeology as well. And so I think they're really great. I've probably read at least 20 or more of the 30 by now. So they're great. So that Scott Mariani, the Ben Hope series.
He's coming on in a few months.
Oh, really? Oh, fabulous news. I must listen to that.
He's just got his first full historical fiction. I'm just over halfway through it. It's called The Pilgrim's Revenge. And it's the journey to the Third Crusade. Why do I keep calling it?
I don't know. You keep calling it First Crusade.
But it's the start of the Third Crusade. So,
Right.
So,
because this book, like I'm reading at the moment, The Templar Secret, he is actually talking, only briefly, about the history of the Templars, who of course were founded in the aftermath of the First Crusade. So that's excellent news. Wonderful. And non-fiction, well, again, I unfortunately barely ever read like historical non-fiction in my spare time. So what I've been reading a lot of recently is because I'm passionately getting into wildlife gardening and photography. I've been reading a lot of books about that. So my apologies. I'm not sure if any of your listeners would be interested in that. But I did treat myself to a book at Christmas, and it's a book of historical maps.
Oh.
So I'm from Cumbria. So this book is called Maps of Cumbria, and it's and then I was looking on my shelves, and I realized that I inherited a book from my mum, which is really old now, called just looking at it here. Muir's Historical Atlas, Ancient, Medieval, and Modern. And it was first published in, I think, 1938. So it's just this great series of maps of Europe, essentially, Europe and the Holy Land, this kind of part of the world. But it kind of just got me thinking about, like the Mappa Mundi. And then in a charity shop a few days ago, I bought a picture of this wonderful map from 1632, which has my hometown on it, which was great. And I'm just astonished at how accurate it is. And England and Wales just look, they've been drawn perfectly as far as I can see. So yes, it's not very exciting, sorry, but I think my non-fiction recommendation would be Muir's Historical Atlas.
I think that is though. I think we often overlook the idea of looking at historical maps, but they can give us so much information about what people knew at the time.
Yeah, and the way they saw the world, like the Mappa Mundi just has Jerusalem at the center, because that's how they saw it.
Yes.
Yeah. And if there's a bit of the ocean they don't know about, they put a whale in it or a sea monster.
Or a dragon.
I think there's quite a bit of the ocean they didn't know about.
Quite a lot of the world they didn't know existed.
Yeah.
I once went to a talk by John, I can't remember his surname, who plays Henry VIII, and he had a map. He was playing a sailor at the time rather than Henry VIII, and he said, "What's wrong with this map?" I said, "Well, you've got Australia on it for starters."
Have you got anything you would like to recommend at all?
Well, fiction-wise, I finally got around to reading a book by Giles Christian, and one of his books that I really liked was Lancelot.
Yeah.
And I know that's not one of his most recent books, but I was always a fan of the Arthurian legend. In fact, I thought when I first decided I wanted to write a book, I considered writing something about the Arthurian legend, going there. But then I discovered Emma, so I went in a different direction. But what I really liked about Lancelot, about Giles's book, is that he focuses on Lancelot, and although he knows the whole Arthurian legend, he really goes his own way with Lancelot, because they don't write too much about the early days of we don't know much about the early days of Lancelot. It gave him an opportunity to write something that was all his own, and I found it really interesting. I really enjoyed it a lot. As for nonfiction, I've been trying to decide, what am I going to say? Because I knew you were going to ask me this question. And I've read, and I'm rereading it now for the second time, a book called Underland by Robert Macfarlane. And it is a story of journeys into darkness and descents into the underground, made looking for knowledge. So it deals with myth, it deals with philosophy and science, and it all has to do with the world beneath our feet. And it's really fascinating. And right now I'm in the chapter where he's under Paris, and he's going to a party in the catacombs of Paris, and he's with these people who are not supposed to be there. They're saflas, and there's this whole group of people who like to go underground and do all kinds of weird. I mean, they go underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. It's just really. Anyway, now he's under Paris, and it's utterly fascinating. He's looked at myth, and he's looked at, well, he even mentions those poor boys in Thailand who were in that cave. Remember when that happened a few years ago? So he talks about that. It's just really, really fascinating. He goes into mines. He goes into mines for potash underneath the North Sea. Ooh, wow. You don't want to be claustrophobic when you read that one. So I'm really enjoying it for the second time around. He's a marvelous
That
writer.
sounds like a good one. Yeah.
That
Oh,
sounds
yeah.
amazing.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really good.
Yeah, it's good to have a different kind of perspective on things that you get from a book like that, isn't it?
Yeah,
Because it's
exactly.
it's one of those, you can imagine the bloke sitting there beginning to write it and thinking, okay, how do I do this?
And I think all the time, how does he remember this? Because he's telling you where he is and
Yeah.
what he's doing. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking, he must have his brain can remember all this stuff,
Yeah.
that he's experienced. Really interesting.
That's brilliant. Do you have a particular fiction and a particular non-fiction book you would like to recommend to our listeners?
I would love to. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Well, I will tell you exactly what I am and have been reading now as my selection, because I've been enjoying it immensely. Haven't finished it yet, but on the fiction side, I am finally reading Moby Dick. And I cannot recommend it enough.
We just had it in our book club last month.
Really? Well, I don't know if you enjoyed it. The whale. I haven't got up to the whale yet, but I am loving it so much in a way I didn't expect. I'm finding it funny. I love the writing. The short chapters mean that I can drop in, and I think the writing is extraordinary. I should ask if you enjoyed it now that I'm really enjoyed it.
I did actually, yes.
I'm glad it's not just me. So yes, Moby Dick, and I'll have to report back to you when I've actually made my way through the whole thing. But what I've just read for the second time, actually, because I was lucky enough to be interviewing him at an event last night, is a new book that came out last year called The Grammar of Angels. And it's by Edward Wilson Lee, who's a very brilliant literary scholar and historian. And it is, in one sense, the life of a Renaissance polymath, combination of golden boy and enfant terrible, called Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, who lived in the late 15th century in Italy. And he only lived for 31 years, and he was a philosopher who set out to know everything.
Bit of a challenge.
No shortage of confidence. He was a superstar of his day. And in other ways, the book is about everything. It's about language and how in history and culture we think about the kinds of language that might get us beyond the material world. So the idea of transcendence and the various different kinds of language that might put us in contact with something beyond this physical world. And obviously that's mediated enormously through the church in 15th century Italy, but because Pico was reaching back into classical philosophy and Islamic philosophy and Jewish philosophy and all sorts of things. It's a book that goes everywhere at the same time as being about a particular moment. It's so beautifully written. It's fantastically lucid and elegant. It's not a long book, and I can't recommend it enough. So that's The Grammar of Angels by Edward Wilson Lee, and everyone knows Moby Dick by Herman Melville. I recommend them both very, very much.
No, that sounds fantastic.
Thank you. I'm going to have to look for that. Grammar of Angels. So, Derek, we've asked our guests. I suppose we should ask each other. So, what are your non-fiction and fiction recommendations for the end of the year?
Okay, well, most of my non-fiction reading is for research when writing novels. So that does mean it's somewhat limited in scope. Currently, I'm working on a new Last of the Romans book, which, as some may know, is set in post-Roman Britain. So I'm going to recommend, for my non-fiction book, I'm going to recommend a book I've used a lot for the background to this novel. It's a book called King Arthur's Country by Stuart Laycock and Christopher Gidlow. It was published last year. And despite the title, it's not really about King Arthur, but about the land that legend puts him in. In other words, post-Roman Britain. And it uses a lot of recent archaeological evidence. And the land it describes is a very long way from most people's imagining of the 5th century. So anyone who wants to take a bit of a deeper dive into this traditionally very sketchy period should read their book. For my fiction pick, I'm going to choose a book we've talked about this year already, Templar Traitor by Angus Donald. For me, it's his best book yet, and it introduces the reader to the very different landscape of Eastern Europe and Asia, where the Mongol hordes rule. It's a terrific story. It's got several layers to it, and it's constructed and written beautifully in a very interesting and engaging way. So that's Templar Traitor by Angus Donald.
I can totally agree with that. The one thing I got about Templar Traitor was you did not know what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's only when you realise that you realise how many books you do sort of know how it's going to end. But with Templar Traitor, it was like every section was a surprise as to how it would go. I think that's because it's such an unfamiliar story.
Yes, yeah. The background to it is unfamiliar to most of us. But yeah, you're right. It's a mystery. It's an action thriller. It's got so many dimensions to it. The characters are great, and the fundamental storylines are great. So, real tour de force by Angus. So, in similar vein, really, our next 3 offerings from people we've interviewed include the recommendations of Scott Mariani, who, of course, is very well known for his action thrillers and exciting stories, and historian and writer David Pilling, and Kathryn Hanley, who is also very well known for her medieval writing, and in particular on medieval warfare, but also now in her fascinating biography of Joanna Plantagenet. Can you suggest a fiction and a non-fiction book that you would recommend to people that you've read, perhaps recently? Doesn't have to be recently, but anything in particular?
I'm a terrible reader. I never read. I have no time for reading. Well, but on the non-fiction side, when I sit at my desk, I've got books all. I mean, you'll be the same. Everyone who gets involved in historical research will be the same. And I'm not really a huge fan of internet research. I love having the books around me. I'm not one of these bibliophile types who loves the smell of the glue. A lot of people seem to be fixated on the smell of the book. But I do like having physical books around me. So it's like you're sitting in a canyon with these huge high walls of books all around you. So there are so many of them, and I'll buy a book. I end up only just reading a paragraph. That's all I needed. So I tend to sort of think of them really just as tools and resources for me. I'll very seldom actually sit and read a whole thing. So I'm surrounded by books. So I mean, I can recommend so many of them for people who have an interest in these subjects. I mean, there's so many. I've got a few on the table here in front of me. I depended very heavily on a book by a writer, John D. Hosler, and it's the story of the Siege of Acre. I mean, I really needed that book. I mean, it goes into such detail. A lot of really juicy stuff that you might not find anywhere else. That was a great book, The Siege of Acre. Tony Mount's a lovely lady. So when people get injured and they need to be fixed up in medieval times, you go to Tony Mount for medieval medicine.
Yeah.
A brilliant book on medieval medicine. Another great book, Tony Mount, Medieval Medicine. Very interesting book indeed. On the fiction side, my kind of guilty pleasure, if you like, is and it's historical, but it's nothing like the era that we're talking about. It's the Patrick O'Brien, Jack Aubrey books during the Napoleonic Wars, which is another period of history that I love. I recently was sent Rome by Ben Kane.
Yeah,
that was interesting. It was an interesting take. But my real passion, I love the Aubrey books. That's something I do like. So there you have it. That's me.
Have you read anything good recently?
Yeah, for the fiction, I'd actually like to recommend an author, Alfred Duggan, who was writing in the 1960s, and he's kind of a little bit neglected these days. But I really like his style. He wrote lots of novels, generally about Normans, Saxons, and Romans. But he's quite different to most sort of novelists you'd find writing these days. He's not at all like people like Sharon Penman or Cecilia Holland. He wrote in a very kind of like, his characters are very pragmatic. It's all generally written from the first person. And they tend to be people who are born into quite low status, and they're trying to claw their way up in the world. His books on the Normans in particular, in Sicily and the Byzantine Empire, are really good. He died in about 1969, and he's if not actually forgotten, he's a little bit sort of neglected, I think. And I think he should be rediscovered. Non-fiction, I would recommend David Stevenson, who's a current historian. He's written lots of brilliant books about medieval Wales, but his best one is about medieval Powys, kingdom and lordships. I bought this book about 10 years ago, and it's very well thumbed because I keep going back to it. He's an absolute master of sort of fiddly source material, and anybody who wants to get beyond the sort of surface readings of what was going on in medieval Wales, David is really good at the kind of internal politics, whilst never being boring, and he brings it all to life, I think.
Wonderful, thank you very much.
Right, in terms of non-fiction, the best thing I've read in a long time is Justine Finharbour Baker's House of Lilies, which is about the Capetian dynasty in France. And, you know, the usual suspects are there, Philip Augustus and St. Louis, but it covers the whole dynasty, and some of the earlier Capetians that I sort of knew slightly less about. Absolutely fascinating characters, and it's really well told. It's one of these books that's, you know, obviously she's got a fabulous scholarly background and the research is really rigorous, but when you read it, you can just, you know, get carried away with your reading because it just reads so well. And, you know, if you want to know which king of France insisted on the arrangements for his marriage, including the provision of a full-grown lion, and if you want to know the really severe consequences that could arise by not returning a library book, in the Middle Ages, this is the book for you. It's fantastic. Can't recommend it highly enough. Now, fiction, please try not to faint, but I'm about to recommend something that's not medieval. I very much enjoy historical fiction, and particularly historical crime. And my very, very favourite series at the moment, even though it's not medieval, is Andrew Taylor's Marwood and Lovett series, which is set in 17th century Restoration London. And not only is it, you know, fantastic in terms of the, you know, the plots and everything, it's just so atmospheric. You feel like you're there. I was choking on the smoke from the Great Fire of London, you know, as I was reading it. I think there's six volumes so far, so I very much hope there'll be a seventh in due course. Brilliant writing.
Yeah.
So for me to recommend that something that's not medieval, you know it's good.
Absolutely. Okay, but enough about our interviewees. Sharon, what books are you going to recommend?
Well, I'm going to be naughty. For my fiction books, I'm actually going to recommend one that isn't medieval, but it is historical. It's actually a time travel one. And I read it earlier this year after we'd read a book by the author with my book club. And then I just bought this one on a whim, and it's Ellie Griffith's The Frozen People. And it's a murder mystery set after COVID, but the detective time travels back to Victorian England. to solve a mystery of an MP's ancestor and whether or not he was guilty of murder. And it's very clever. It's very well written. And after I read it, I gave it to my dad and said, "You're going to love this." And he read it in a day. It is just one of those you wouldn't think of it, but when you pick it up, it's one of those you really can't put down. So definitely Ellie Griffith's The Frozen People, and anything by Ellie Griffith. She wrote the Ruth Galloway series as well, which is a detective series with an archaeologist. So it's all very history based, but combining two of my favorites, historical fiction and crime. And my second fiction recommendation is actually a series of an author we had on earlier this year, Claire Dunn. She writes as C.F. Dunn, and she writes a series called The Tarnished Crown. Now, I've read the first two books, which were absolutely excellent, and the new book, Degrees of Affinity, comes out this week. And it's a story of a fictional family set during the time of the Wars of the Roses. And the reason I picked up the books in the first place was they're set at Tickhill Castle, which is just around the corner in South Yorkshire, just around the corner from where I live. And the first book, I kept trying to catch her out with locations and journey times and things, but no, she has done her research. So definitely the Tarnished Crown series by C.F. Dunn. As non-fiction, seeing as we've already mentioned it, I will give a quick plug to Catherine Hanley's Lioness Heart. It is an extraordinary biography of an extraordinary woman, but it also highlights the difficulty in writing biographies of medieval women, in that there's so much we don't know and we have to conjecture and work out from the sources and give theories rather than explicit explanations, because there's so little written about medieval women. And speaking of Lioness Heart, that was about Joanna Plantagenet. The book I would really like to recommend is about Joanna's mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, and it's a new book, a short biography, really. It's only, you get by Eleanor of Aquitaine biographies and they're like 400, 500 pages long. This one is just 200 pages long, and it's by Lindy Grant. It's called Eleanor of Aquitaine, Woman, Queen and Legend. And it is technically an academic tome. I mean, the endorsements for it are from Elizabeth Van Houts, Honorary Professor of Medieval European History at Cambridge, Stephen Church, Professor of Medieval Studies at Lincoln, Nicholas Vincent, Professor at Uni of East Anglia. So she's got some great endorsements. But it is, what I love about it is, although it is technically an academic tome, it's incredibly easy read. And she just goes through each section of Eleanor of Aquitaine's life, and she presents her story, but she also analyzes it, and she's not totally pro Eleanor. She points out Eleanor's mistakes as well as her positives, and places her firmly in the medieval period. It's not Eleanor of Aquitaine the feminist that you often hear about. You can tell she admires Eleanor and how clever Eleanor is, and how she uses what power she has to make the most of her life. So I will definitely recommend Eleanor of Aquitaine, Woman, Queen and Legend by Lindy Grant.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, now we are to our last few authors. We've already spoken about Angus Donald, and he's up next. Angus, famed for his Robin Hood stories. He's had a new one out this year. And then this new series, The Templar Traitor, promises to be a spectacular series in itself. After Angus, we have the wonderful Sara Cockerill, who is also a biographer of Eleanor of Aquitaine and Eleanor of Castile as well, wasn't it? And finally, Lauren Johnson, whose new biography of Margaret Beaufort promises to be essential reading.
Is there anything you have that you could recommend, either fiction, non-fiction, or both?
I read one which is quite good recently, very good read actually. It's Michael Arnold.
Oh, yeah.
It's The Savage Isle by Michael Arnold, and it's really interesting because it's original. Well, this is about the invasion of Britain by the Romans, and that's well trodden, and Romans in Britain is quite well trodden. But the thing that makes this interesting and unique is that I've never read a book that was about Britain before the Romans. So basically, the Romans are kind of a presence off screen, looming and influencing, but they don't actually invade during the novel. So that's quite interesting, and he paints a very good, vivid picture of, these sort of Celtic warlords and druids and human sacrifice and all the different warring tribes of Britain, tiny little, basically one village against the next. And that's really interesting. I thought that was good. It's not very nicely written as well, and a departure for Mike, who did some very good English Civil War ones.
Stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I've been doing is reading Terry Pratchett.
Oh, right.
I don't know why. I read him a lot when I was younger, and then sort of stopped, and then was dimly aware of him, and then he died, and then I still had all the books, and I just thought I just really feel like something fun and silly and not connected with my work to read.
Is there a fiction or non-fiction book that you've read recently that you'd recommend?
Yes. So I have read all of Elodie Harper's books. I don't know if you know her. She's written a trilogy called The Wolf Den about Pompeii. And her most recent book, Boudicca's Daughter, is out. That's the most recent fiction book I have read, and I do really like the way she approaches the stories of forgotten women, which, why would I like that, I wonder? Castile, the Shadow Queen. And she really grapples beautifully, I think, with some of the issues that women have encountered in these situations in the past. In terms of non-fiction, I tend to read more non-fiction than fiction. I've been having such a wonderful time. I, of course, read Dan Jones's brilliant Henry V, which then sent me into Helen Castor's Eagle and the Heart, which then made me reread everything that Thomas Penn has written, because I was reminded how much I like his writing. So that's been a sort of splurge of later medieval with brilliant writing. But in terms of the kind of book that I've learned the most, that I really knew nothing about, a book called The Herods by somebody called Bruce Chilton. And it's an amazing book which contextualizes the Herodian dynasty in Christian and Judaic scholarship and explains their political role, and it sort of explains some of, where Pontius Pilate was coming from politically. And that's one of those books that I'll come to the end of the year and think, wow, so glad I found that.
Well, I had heard of it, but I haven't read it, so I think I might have to go and get that one.
Yeah,
and I've been looking at Boudicca's Daughter, thinking I need to read that.
Oh, yeah. Well, you will enjoy Boudicca's Daughter, I'm sure, and you won't regret the incredibly detailed cross-references in the Herods.
Oh, brilliant. Can you give us a fiction and a non-fiction book recommendation?
Yes, I've got it on my desk to remind me, because I have such problems remembering things I've read. Matrix by Lauren Groff is amazing. Okay, so I picked it up sort of just because I liked the cover, actually. And I was like, oh, it seems to be about nuns. And the blurb is completely unrepresentative, so just ignore the blurb. Certainly mine is. It's all about like female warriors and crusaders. It's nothing to do with that. It's about someone called Marie de France, who was 12th century writer, possible half-sister of Henry II. And this book is it's just unlike anything I've ever read. So it's completely fictionalized. It's imagining her life as abbess of this particular place, I think in England.
Shaftesbury, was it? Shaftesbury Abbey.
Yes, I think so. I don't know if it specifies in the book. Yeah. And the thing that I found most interesting was that it is all through a female lens. So whenever it refers to a male character, who often in, medieval writing, it'll be like so-and-so's, the daughter of the Duke of Somerset, whatever. No, it will always put someone in relation to a woman. So even when it's talking about the king, it's talking about the queen's husband, things like that. And it's just such an interesting way of tweaking how you see the world. And it makes complete sense because this is a female community where they are only sort of publicly engaging with other women. But it's really beautiful writing. Lauren Groff is a great writer. So Matrix, I would definitely recommend.
I'm going to have to get that one, because it's funny because I went to the Women in Their Own Words, Medieval Women in Their Own Words exhibition at the British Library, and they had a book of lays by Marie de France open, and I was like, oh my god, I did a lot of that going throughout it.
Yeah, it was astonishing. I wish I could have gone more than once.
Yeah, I should have gone a second time. I should have gone earlier, actually, because I went at the end. It was closing in about 5 days, and I finally got to go, and I'm thinking I want to come back.
Yeah, that was amazing, that entire exhibition.
So that was your fiction one. Have you got a non-fiction book that you recommend?
I mean, apart from mine, obviously.
Well, we'll be recommending yours because we're doing a podcast with you. So. You don't have to. It's not compulsory.
Yes.
Do you know what? I had a real issue with this because at the minute, all of the things I'm reading are very esoteric.
Yeah.
It's like, would you like a recommendation on confessional mobility?
Yeah.
Yes, I can imagine.
You're not alone in that.
The early modern...
Other guests have sometimes said, well, yeah, I'm not sure anybody's going to want to read what I'm reading.
Yeah, but I would say it's... there was a book by Frederick Smith, which I think is Confessional, or I can't remember the title. I'll have to actually look it up. Confessional Mobility, and it's about mid-Tudor Catholics and their relationship with the Counter-Reformation, and also going into exile and then coming back from exile. And that, along with Lisbeth Corrin's Confessional Mobility, just very interesting re-evaluation of why people, for religious reasons, went abroad and how they interacted with Europe and with European ideas, and then brought them back to England at various points. It sort of shifts some narratives, but it is quite specific.
Yeah.
I found it interesting.
So I'd like to say a huge thank you to all our authors for taking their time to find some books to recommend and giving such interesting analysis of those books. It's fascinating. They've actually added to my reading list considerably. So a huge thank you to everybody for that. I think it's only fair, Derek, that we actually recommend one of ours each, seeing as this is a book recommendations, and we're hoping to give people ideas of what books to get for Christmas. So Derek, which of mine would you recommend?
Well, I'm going to recommend a book which I think sheds some new light and very necessary new light on the role of several of the women in the period known as the Anarchy, when Stephen's reign was disrupted by his rival Matilda, Empress Matilda. So I'm going to recommend Women of the Anarchy, because I think that really does help to put the anarchy very much in the centre of medieval history, rather than an also-ran which most people have vaguely heard of but don't know anything about. So if you want to find out a bit more about not only the anarchy itself, but the part played in it by particularly two of the key women, Stephen's Queen Matilda and the Empress Matilda, who was his rival, then I strongly recommend Women of the Anarchy.
Thank you. I think I'd actually agree with you. I'm rather proud of Women of the Anarchy.
Yeah, so I think it's one of your best. So is there a book of mine that you might like to recommend? And if there isn't, then I shall go away and hide.
Actually, I know we only agreed on one each, but there's two of yours I'd like to recommend, Derek. Firstly, Feud by Derek Birks. And it was your first book. And I seem to remember I gave it high praise at the time, calling it a breath of fresh air.
You did.
In historical fiction. And it still is to me. It was one of the best books I'd read at the time. It was just fast-paced, energetic, and had a very good female lead who you managed not to kill, thanks to my pleas often.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, but I haven't said which one of them
That's
it
true.
is.
Yeah, you haven't.
Because there are a few strong women in there.
Yeah.
So I think if anyone wants to get to an introduction to your fiction, I think Feud is a great place to start. And I think it'd also get them reading everything afterwards, because it certainly did with me. But the one I would recommend as essential reading for anyone interested in the 15th century is your latest book, and your first foray into non-fiction, A Guide to the Wars of the Roses. Because that is such an easy narrative to read. It's broken into small chunks so that you don't just look at pages and pages of writing and think, oh God, I'll never get through this. It's nice, easy sections so you can pick it up and put it down if you've just got 5 minutes. But it's very cleverly written, easy to understand, and some very interesting witty observations. You write it like you're talking to somebody. So when you're reading it, it's like, oh, I've often felt like I was having a conversation with you as I was reading it. So it just makes it very accessible. And I think it's great because it's also accessible to any age. So if you've got kids who are studying the Wars of the Roses at GCSE or A level, they would be able to read this. I think that's probably actually an indication, because Derek used to be a history teacher at one stage. So I think he put a little bit of that experience in there. But if you're like my age, or my dad found it easy to read as well, and very enjoyable. So, and that's usually my indication of a good book, if my dad enjoyed it.
Well,
we've got very similar tastes. So yes, definitely. A Guide to the Wars of the Roses by Derek Birks is a great introduction to the period for you to get the people, the places, and the battles in the right order, and to make sense of the story behind it.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. But I'm not just saying it because you're there. I'd say it behind your back as well. Like I say, I said it to my dad. So thank you very much to everyone for listening. I do hope you found some inspiration in this episode for books to buy, books to read, books to gift. You know, you don't have to keep every book you buy. You can gift it, and you can buy books as gifts. You can always, if you insist on reading it, you can always do what I did one year, which was buy my sister a book, read it, and then gave it to her for Christmas. And she never forgave me.
Now we know.
Read it first
now we know. It's all coming out. Buy it early, read it, and then gift it. At least you know then you're gifting a decent book. That's your excuse.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Do join us next time for what will be our Christmas episode. So I'm sure we'll have a very interesting treat for you, but you'll have to wait and see what it is. Thank you very much for joining us. I've been Sharon Bennett Connolly.
And I'm Derek Birks. You can find our podcasts on your favourite podcast provider, but you can also find them on YouTube. Just search on A Slice of Medieval. Don't forget to subscribe either on YouTube or on your podcast provider site. And it'd be great if you could give us some feedback in the form of a like or a comment if you have a minute. Thanks for listening.